McIlvenna Bay copper mine is under construction in east-central Saskatchewan, and it was one of the projects billed by the Prime Minister, Mr. Carney.
It will be Saskatchewan's first copper mine in 30 years and is set to start production next year. Once operational, the mine could produce up to 4,900 tons of copper, zinc, gold, and silver each day over an 18-year lifespan.
Across the quiet plains of Saskatchewan, the sound of drilling has become a new national rhythm. Beneath the flat horizon, Canada is building something far greater than a mine. It's building independence. While Washington's tariff walls grow taller, Saskatchewan is digging deeper. President Trump thought higher import duties would force Canada to yield. Instead, they awakened a new wave of investment, pride, and purpose. The McIlvenna Bay copper mine, once just a blueprint on a northern map, is now a billion-dollar symbol of resilience. In the middle of a trade war, Canada has found its power buried in rock.
The McIlvenna Bay project, near Creighton in east-central Saskatchewan, is the province's first new copper mine in 3 decades. Construction is 60% complete, backed by more than 1.18 billion Canadian dollars in combined private and public investment. Once production begins in mid-2026, it will support 800 construction jobs and about 450 permanent positions. Ottawa has placed the mine on its list of 5 nation-building projects and assigned it to the new Major Projects Office in Calgary to fast-track completion. Saskatchewan's government added a $70 million investment tax credit, tied the site to the Island Falls Hydro Network, and required an underground battery electric vehicle fleet to cut emissions. What makes this story stand out is the timing. While U.S. tariffs disrupted North America's auto and steel industries, Saskatchewan quietly rewrote the playbook. Instead of demanding bailouts or retaliating, it built something that could last for generations. The McIlvenna Bay project now anchors a broader critical minerals corridor stretching across Canada's prairies, from lithium brines in the south to rare earth processing in the north. Every kilometer of that network reduces Canada's dependence on U.S. supply chains and deepens its leverage in future negotiations.
Copper has quietly become the backbone of the modern economy. It carries electricity through every car, phone, and data center. The International Energy Agency predicts that global demand could quadruple by 2040 as electric vehicles, defense systems, and artificial intelligence servers expand. Yet Canada's copper output has fallen about 25% over the past decade, according to Natural Resources Canada. That decline exposed a vulnerability just as Trump's trade war intensified. By placing McIlvenna Bay among its top national priorities, Ottawa has made copper a centerpiece of its economic sovereignty strategy. Federal programs like the Strategic Innovation Fund and Canada Growth Fund are not just subsidies, they are part of a deliberate industrial rebuild. This shift marks a turning point from decades of resource dependence to value chain integration, where Canada mines, refines, and exports finished materials under its own control. For industries like clean energy, EV batteries, and AI infrastructure, Canadian copper offers both stability and credibility in an increasingly politicized global market. Each ton of copper pulled from Saskatchewan's bedrock now strengthens Canada's bargaining position ahead of the 2026 USMCA review, proving that resource security can be a stronger shield than any tariff defense. Washington's 50% import duty on refined copper products was supposed to protect U.S. industry. Instead, it exposed a gap the United States can't fill. Domestic mines supply less than half of U.S. copper demand, forcing manufacturers to import raw concentrates from abroad. As Trump tightened the screws, investors turned north. The McIlvenna Bay mine will ship copper and zinc concentrates to smelters serving Europe and Asia, markets eager for clean copper from a stable democracy. Backed by major investors like Fairfax Financial, Agnico Eagle, and the Canada Growth Fund, the project has become a model of what policy experts call mineral sovereignty. In practical terms, that means Canada controls the resource while attracting foreign capital that once flowed south. Trump's attempt to corner Canada has cornered his own economy instead. U.S. manufacturers now face higher costs, while Canada cashes in on the global shortage his tariffs helped create.
From a distance, Saskatchewan looks unchanged. Prairie grass, wind, and quiet towns. Yet beneath that calm lies a new industrial heartbeat. The copper mine near Creighton is not just about metal. It represents how Canada adapts when pushed. It brings jobs to northern communities, partners with Indigenous nations like the Peter Ballantine Cree Nation, and powers the transition to cleaner energy with hydro-based electricity. The lesson goes beyond economics. Trump's tariffs were meant to divide, but they reminded Canadians of their shared purpose: to own their resources, to innovate at home, and to never let politics dictate their future. McIlvenna Bay is no longer just a mining site, it's a blueprint for how smaller economies can stand tall against protectionist superpowers. While Washington's policies grow louder, Canada's response remains steady: invest, innovate, and build. Every tunnel and ton of ore tells the same story. Beneath the prairies, Canada is building the one thing no tariff can control: independence.
You know, we're finding hundreds of billions of dollars of cash is pouring into our country now.
In Washington, the promise of America First was supposed to make the country stronger. Yet across the Pacific, that promise is falling apart. For months, President Donald Trump has pushed an aggressive campaign of reciprocal tariffs and cash-for-access trade deals. It worked at first, on paper, but now the two closest allies the United States has in Asia, Japan and South Korea, are quietly pulling away.
Our citizens were freed from America's arbitrary detention, but now the U.S. is pressuring us with tariffs despite the deal. When President Lee Jae-myung declared yesterday that he would not sign anything against national interests, the U.S. threatened either sign or pay the original 25% tariff instead of the agreed 15%.
And Japan's economic revitalization minister, Rokse Akazawa, has stated that the broad trade agreement between Japan and the United States remains unsettled.
In Tokyo, frustration is building. In Seoul, anger has already erupted. These are not isolated tensions. They are the clearest signs that America's network of allies, built over decades of trust and shared prosperity, is beginning to fracture. What began as a show of strength is now turning into a global backlash. Trump's administration once bragged that its trade policies would bring in trillions of dollars. Instead, they are costing the U.S. billions in lost investment, broken trust, and diplomatic credibility. The story unfolding across Asia reveals how quickly friends can turn cautious and how a superpower can lose its footing when power becomes pressure. In Japan, the government's tone has shifted from optimism to unease. Tokyo's economic minister has said the trade agreement with the United States remains unsettled. While Washington reduced auto tariffs from 25% to 15%, the crucial orders covering pharmaceuticals and semiconductors are still missing. Without those, Japan insists there is no final deal. Behind the scenes, the dispute runs deeper. The U.S. is asking Japan for an investment package worth 550 billion yen to rebuild American industries in semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and shipbuilding. For Washington, it is a strategy to restore manufacturing power. For Tokyo, it looks like a demand. Officials worry that paying billions up front to secure lower tariffs blurs the line between trade and tribute. Economists warn Japan could lose both leverage and independence in future negotiations. Even Japan's business leaders are uneasy. The deal lacks transparency, and no clear timeline has been provided. Tokyo's stance is careful but firm. Until all conditions are clarified, the agreement cannot be considered final. This hesitation is historic. It is the first time in decades that Japan has openly questioned the fairness of a U.S. trade arrangement. The uncertainty is delaying cross-border investments, and the political cost is mounting. For Japan, the risk is economic. For the United States, it is trust.
Okay. Well, let's get back into the Hyundai raid impact. And clearly, This was a pretty shocking event where the immigration policy of the Trump administration clashed with its desire to onshore investment. And I think that the reverberations are still playing out in terms of impact on Korean public opinion.
South Korea's response has been even sharper. In Seoul, the government is refusing to sign what it calls an unbalanced trade pact. President Lee Jae-myung has said publicly that he will not approve any deal that works against Korea's national interest. The United States reacted within hours, warning that if Seoul refuses to sign, the tariffs on Korean goods will revert from the reduced 15% back to the original 25%. This ultimatum has been described inside Korea as a financial threat, not a negotiation. The deal in question includes a $350 billion investment commitment demanded by Washington. The structure, distribution, and profit sharing would all be dictated by U.S. terms. For many Koreans, that crosses a line. Tensions deepened after a high-profile incident in Georgia earlier this year when U.S. immigration authorities raided a Hyundai plant under construction. The operation disrupted technical teams flown in from Korea to help start production, and was seen by Korean media as a humiliation. Economists now warn that the raid has created lasting uncertainty about America's reliability as an investment destination. Korean officials and analysts describe a growing trust deficit. Even as Korean companies expand shipbuilding, battery, and auto operations in the United States, they are quietly reviewing new projects or delaying them altogether. Observers note that the U.S. government's own agencies appear uncoordinated, trade policy pulling one way, immigration enforcement pulling another. That inconsistency is making investors nervous. In trade terms, Korea remains one of America's largest partners, exporting tens of billions of dollars in vehicles and electronics each year. But with tariffs, visa disruptions, and unpredictable rules, the confidence that once defined the alliance has eroded. What was once cooperation now feels like coercion, and what used to be loyalty is turning into resistance.
The shockwaves from Asia are spreading far beyond the Pacific. In Canada, the same tensions are taking hold. Since early 2025, Canadian exports have faced a 25% tariff on most goods and a 10% levy on energy. Ottawa retaliated before scaling back to keep talks alive. Prime Minister Mark Carney is now seeking tariff relief, but Washington's stance remains unchanged. Lower tariffs will come only with major financial commitments inside the United States. It is the same pattern seen in Japan and Korea, relief offered only if the partner country pays first. Yet this model is collapsing. Instead of drawing more money into the U.S., it is driving allies to diversify away from it. In Asia, both Japan and Korea are expanding trade ties through the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. Europe is deepening free trade with ASEAN and Latin America. Canada is building stronger bridges with the EU and Indonesia to offset U.S. pressure. Analysts estimate that the combined shift of Japanese, Korean, and Canadian capital away from the U.S. could redirect hundreds of billions of dollars in investment over the next 3 years. These are funds once destined for American factories and shipyards, now flowing to more predictable markets. Washington's credibility as a reliable partner is under strain. Allies are voicing doubts about the future of U.S.-led trade. The message from capitals across the world is clear. Partnerships cannot survive if they are built on threats. For Trump, the optics are stark. The strategy designed to show American strength is leaving the U.S. more isolated. Allies in Asia and North America are rewriting their playbooks, forming new alliances that bypass Washington altogether. As Canada prepares for another round of talks, its negotiators are watching Tokyo and Seoul closely. Both countries stood firm and paid the price. Now Ottawa faces the same choice: comply and risk sovereignty, or resist and face tariffs that hurt domestic industries. Across the world, the cash for relief experiment is revealing its true cost. The United States has not gained the trillions once promised. It has lost billions in credibility, in investment, and in goodwill.
From Tokyo to Seoul to Ottawa, the pattern is unmistakable. Trump's trade doctrine began as a rallying cry for American revival. But as the demands grew heavier and the deals became one-sided, that doctrine began to unravel. In Japan, the deal remains unfinished. In Korea, trust is fading. In Canada, talks are stalling. Each step meant to secure dominance has pushed America's partners further away. The final image is not one of triumph, but of isolation, a superpower surrounded by allies who no longer feel like friends. America First, once meant to rebuild national strength, now risks turning into something else entirely: America alone.
I think he's a great prime minister. I mean, he could represent me anytime. I will tell you, I'm not saying that because he's here. No, he is a very strong, very good leader.
In Washington, the cameras captured another handshake, another round of smiles inside the Oval Office. President Donald Trump praised his guest, Prime Minister Mark Carney, and the two leaders spoke of friendship and trade. But behind those polite gestures, the stakes could not be higher. For months, Trump's tariffs have tested the economic bond between the United States and Canada. What began as an attempt to force Ottawa into a new deal has now exposed cracks in America's own economy. Factories are slowing down, prices are climbing, and key U.S. states that depend on Canadian energy and materials are feeling the strain. The October 7 meeting between Trump and Carney was meant to reset relations. It ended without a formal deal, yet it marked a quiet turning point. Canada did not yield. Instead, it used patience, economic leverage, and a sense of shared purpose to turn American pressure into a form of power.
Let's be clear about the relationship as it stands right now. We are the second largest trading partner of the United States. We do a lot of trade going across the border. Secondly, we are the largest foreign investor in the United States. $500 billion in the last 5 years alone, probably $8 trillion in the next 5 years if we get the agreement that we expect to get.
Canadian materials are deeply woven into American supply chains. Ontario steel goes into Michigan car frames. Quebec aluminum powers jet parts assembled in Ohio. When the tariffs hit, costs for those same American factories spiked overnight. Construction firms in Texas and Florida reported higher material prices by late summer 2025. Furniture producers in North Carolina warned of job cuts as imported wood components became too expensive to source. Meanwhile, Canadian exports slowed but did not collapse. Many firms shifted their shipments to Europe and Asia under existing trade pacts, while Ottawa cushioned affected sectors with targeted support. By September, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and several Great Lakes governors publicly urged Washington to reconsider. They argued that the tariffs were fueling inflation instead of reducing it. Inside Canada, the mood changed from frustration to resolve. The public saw that Trump's strategy was not breaking Ottawa's will, but exposing America's dependence on cross-border trade. The message became clear: the harder Washington squeezed, the more damage it caused to itself. Unlike the United Kingdom or the European Union, Canada cannot rely on distance to escape American policy shocks. The two nations share the world's longest undefended border, a 9,000-kilometer lifeline through which goods, energy, and investment flow every day. Carney reminded Americans of what that relationship means. Canada is their second-largest trading partner and their single largest foreign investor, with more than $500 billion invested over the past 5 years. If trade tensions ease, those investments could reach $8 trillion within the next 5 years, according to figures discussed by both governments. This level of integration gives Ottawa a different kind of strength. Ontario alone supplies electricity to states such as New York, Michigan, and Minnesota, helping to power factories, hospitals, and homes. When Trump's tariffs raised costs for those same regions, Canadian leaders quietly reminded local governors that their economic stability depends on cooperation, not confrontation. At the same time, Carney's government began shifting incentives toward domestic manufacturing. Companies producing steel and auto parts were encouraged to use off-peak electricity for cheaper power, effectively redirecting energy that once supported U.S. industry. The symbolism was striking. Canada could choose to keep the lights on south of the border or turn that current inward to strengthen its own factories. Trump wanted leverage, yet geography and integration meant Canada held most of it. While Washington operated in crisis mode, Ottawa projected calm. Carney faced intense domestic pressure to strike a deal, but he resisted the urge to retaliate with sweeping counter-tariffs. Instead, he pulled back Canada's planned digital services tax, a gesture of goodwill that reopened dialogue. This approach contrasted sharply with the mood in the United States. The federal government remained partly shut down due to budget stalemates. Inflation was rising, and investors faced uncertainty over shifting tariff lists. By comparison, Canada's fiscal position was stable. International agencies kept the country's AAA credit rating. Its debt-to-GDP ratio remained the lowest in the G7, and the Bank of Canada maintained steady interest rates even as global markets wavered. The contrast was not lost on financial analysts. Stability had become Canada's best diplomatic weapon. While Trump sought quick wins through public pressure, Carney built credibility quietly, aligning provincial premiers and business groups around a single goal: keep trade channels open and prevent panic. Even conservative figures who opposed Carney politically, such as former Minister Peter MacKay and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, acknowledged that the Prime Minister had to succeed for the sake of the national economy. The consensus was rare, and it strengthened Ottawa's hand. By the time the October meeting concluded, the U.S. and Canada agreed to maintain technical talks and pause further escalation. No one declared victory, yet the silence itself spoke volumes. Carney had managed to turn confrontation into cooperation without conceding sovereignty. At the heart of the standoff lies a truth both sides cannot escape. The two economies are built together. More than 60% of components used in American auto assembly plants originate in Canada, according to North American industry data. Quebec's aluminum and Ontario's steel remain critical inputs for U.S. aviation and construction. When Trump revived his 51st state remark, many Canadians saw it as an insult, but others recognized it as proof of how intertwined the two nations have become. Each tariff, each soundbite only underscored that separation would harm both. This reality reshaped the political landscape in the Great Lakes region. Governors from states like Michigan and Wisconsin, home to millions of workers tied to cross-border trade, openly opposed further tariffs. They called for cooperation on steel, autos, and energy rather than escalation. Canada's strategy was to highlight this shared dependency without turning it into a public feud. Through joint industrial meetings and energy briefings, Ottawa quietly reminded U.S. officials that integrated grids, pipelines, and manufacturing corridors cannot be rebuilt elsewhere without enormous cost. In effect, the North American supply chain itself became Canada's shield. Every car part crossing the Detroit-Windsor Bridge, every megawatt of power flowing south served as living evidence that partnership, not punishment, is the only sustainable model. Trump's tariffs may have been loud, but Canada's integration was louder in practice. When the second Trump-Carney meeting ended, there was no new trade deal to announce, yet Canada walked away stronger than before. It had protected its industries from escalation, rallied bipartisan support at home, and earned sympathy from governors, investors, and even segments of the American business community. The U.S. administration may still hold the tariff lever, but Canada controls something more durable: trust, consistency, and the quiet backing of economic facts. Trump's strategy to pressure Ottawa has instead revealed how dependent Washington remains on its northern neighbor. The story that began as a test of strength is turning into a lesson in interdependence. In the long run, tariffs can be lifted or replaced, but the networks of energy, labor, and investment that bind these two nations cannot be unmade. Trump wanted a headline victory. Carney aimed for endurance. And as the lights of the Great Lakes continue to glow on both sides of the border, it is clear whose approach is keeping them on.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is continuing his globe-trotting search for trade and investment today. And this morning in Ottawa, the Prime Minister hosted his counterpart from Ireland.
This is one of our strongest relationships, culturally, economically, with respect to shared values in foreign policy.
Across the Atlantic, a striking message is taking shape. Ireland's Prime Minister has called aligning with Canada the obvious choice under U.S. tariffs. On the same day, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney left Ottawa for London to meet leaders of the United Kingdom, Spain, and Denmark. These two developments might look routine, but together they highlight something bigger. Washington's tariff campaign, designed to bring partners closer, is instead nudging them to look elsewhere. Since early September, the Trump administration has enforced its reciprocal tariff regime, removing duty-free treatment for small imports, adding surcharges on heavy trucks, and announcing a 100% tariff on branded pharmaceuticals effective October 1st. The European Union, already under a 15% ceiling on auto and parts exports to the U.S., is recalculating its options. And one of its member states, Ireland, has chosen to say the quiet part out loud. Ireland's relationship with Canada is not new. Under the provisional application of CETA, their trade has doubled over the past 7 years. The Irish government has now pledged to ratify the agreement formally this year and to send a high-level trade mission across the Atlantic. For Dublin, the motivation is clear. U.S. tariffs hit pharmaceuticals hard, a sector worth tens of billions annually to Ireland's economy. By tightening links with Canada, Irish policymakers are hedging against instability in their largest market. The relationship is not only about exports. Irish leaders have invited Canadian firms to bid on major infrastructure, such as the new metro system planned for Dublin. At the same time, Irish companies see opportunities in Canada's own large-scale infrastructure spending, from public transit to energy. Yes, there are barriers, including interprovincial trade frictions and regulatory complexity, but both governments are acknowledging them and working to streamline. With Ireland set to hold the EU Council presidency in the latter half of 2026, the political signal is powerful. Canada gains a friend with influence inside the European system at precisely the moment when Washington's approach is generating uncertainty. The Irish declaration matters not only in bilateral terms. When a mid-sized EU economy frames Canada as an obvious hedge, it legitimizes a wider realignment. Carney's meetings in London and continental capitals are part of this pattern. Countries are not waiting for tariff relief from Washington. They are writing new playbooks. Even though the US-EU framework capped most tariffs at 15%, the uncertainties surrounding Trump's policy makes diversification rational. Firms and governments prefer predictability, and right now predictability is easier to find in channels linking Europe and Canada. For the United States, this amounts to an erosion of leverage. The original goal of the tariff strategy was to pull investment and supply chains back to U.S. soil. Instead, Washington is seeing partners deepen ties with each other, often with Canada in the middle. What was meant to concentrate trade is diffusing it. For American consumers and industries, the consequences are already visible. Higher tariffs on home goods, furniture, and trucks risk pushing prices upward. The pharmaceutical surcharge may create pressure if domestic production capacity does not expand quickly enough. Meanwhile, the longer-term effect is that contracts, capital, and joint ventures are landing in Canada and Europe instead of the United States. Ireland's formal ratification of CETA and its upcoming trade mission will be milestones to watch. So will the results of Carney's European tour and any follow-on agreements between Canada and the UK. For U.S. policymakers, the lesson is straightforward. Tariffs can redirect trade flows, but not always toward their intended destination. In this case, the Ireland-Canada pivot shows that pressure designed to reinforce America's centrality is instead encouraging allies to stitch together alternatives. The real scoreboard will not be speeches, but investment decisions, export shares, and supply chain maps in the quarters ahead.
I would ask you to, when you think about Canada, actually that's my request, think about Canada. As a strong, sovereign, independent nation, think about Canada as that.
To the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered remarks that sounded like a direct challenge to Donald Trump's economic vision. The setting was formal, yet the message was striking. While Washington has leaned on tariffs and hardline tactics, Carney presented Canada as confident, resourceful, and ready to lead. For an audience of diplomats, investors, and policy thinkers, it was a moment that flipped expectations. Instead of looking cornered by America's pressure, Canada looked energized and outward-facing. Carney's words landed as a reminder that Trump's tariff gamble has created space for others to project strength.
We have what the world wants. Take on the energy side, we are an energy superpower. We are top 5 in 10 of the world's most important critical minerals. We are a leading developer of AI.
Carney's central argument was simple. Canada has what the world needs. He listed energy, minerals, technology, and capital as the pillars of a strategy that could thrive even in a fractured global system. Canada already produces 85% of its energy from clean sources and is one of the largest exporters of liquefied natural gas. The country is also in the top 5 for reserves of 10 critical minerals, and 40% of listed mining companies worldwide are based in Canada. On technology, Carney pointed to the volume of AI and quantum talent produced by Canadian universities. And beyond resources and research, Canadian pension funds remain among the most active infrastructure investors globally. At a time when the United States is demanding billions in foreign investment under strict tariff frameworks, Canada is pitching itself as stable, reliable, and fiscally capable. This contrast is powerful. Trump's tariffs were meant to pull investment into the U.S., yet they are making Canada's pitch look more attractive. Carney went further, laying out how Ottawa is turning words into deals. In late June, Canada signed a sweeping economic and security agreement with the European Union, the most comprehensive pact ever between the EU and a non-member. Just last week, Ottawa advanced a new cooperative framework with Mexico inside the USMCA, ensuring deeper trade links at the very moment Washington was using tariffs to apply pressure. Carney also pointed to Canada's role in building G7 buyers clubs for critical minerals, designed to reduce reliance on China and guarantee predictable supplies for allies. These moves are especially significant because they lock Canada into long-term arrangements on both sides of the Atlantic and across North America. In practice, it means European auto plants, Mexican factories, and U.S. defense contractors may all find themselves relying on Canadian resources and trade corridors. That kind of structural leverage is what makes Trump's tariffs look less like a weapon and more like an opening for Canada. These are not symbolic gestures. Each step ties Canada into new alliances while chipping away at the leverage Washington hoped to wield. Instead of isolation, Ottawa has opened doors in Europe, Mexico, and Asia, positioning itself at the center of supply chains that the U.S. cannot easily replicate.
We have the resources the world needs. We have the talent to turn that potential into growth. We're a reliable partner. We're connected more than anyone else through trading relationships with any other part of the world.
The contrast is hard to ignore. Trump has promoted tariffs as a tool to restore American control, yet those same tariffs are leaving space for Canada to climb. Carney's remarks in New York showed a leader framing his country as both resource powerhouse and dependable partner. Ottawa has reduced interprovincial trade barriers, passed fast-track legislation for hundreds of billions of dollars in new projects, and committed to doubling defense spending by 2030. These moves reinforce the idea that Canada is not waiting for permission. Instead, it is using Washington's hardline stance as fuel to accelerate its own agenda. For U.S. policymakers, the message is uncomfortable. Allies that were expected to bend under tariffs are finding ways to thrive without them. Carney closed by urging the audience to think of Canada not only as a country of values, but as a nation with tangible strengths that the world depends on. In the end, the council speech underscored a reversal of roles. While Trump builds barriers, Carney builds bridges. And in this shifting landscape, that difference may decide which vision of North America carries more weight in the decade ahead.